Hi, everyone, and welcome to Fierce Conversations with Toby, the show where we discover the silver lining in life's most difficult stories. I'm your host, Toby Dorr. Hi, Charli. Thanks so much for joining me on this episode of Fierce Conversations with Toby. Before we start, I'm delighted to have you here. Before we start, can you tell me what your favorite color is and why?
It's so interesting. I listened to your podcast and I got a clue that would be asked. And so my favorite color is royal purple right now.
Royal purple. Wow.
Yeah. And I like specifically that's right now because it's changed many times for me. And I think it's based on the season of life. And right now I am leaning into finding more rest and pleasure. And that just feels like the color purple.
Yes. Yes, I love that. And I do think that it changes depending on our circumstances or the part of our journey we're on in life. Different colors appeal to us at different times. So I like that. Purple's one of my favorite colors too. And I like to ask that question because it just kind of gives people a little bit of a peek into who people are. And it's not really a fierce question. My husband's always asking me, why do you ask that question? But when I want to take it out, all my listeners go, no, we like to know. So we leave it in.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I love when people are specific and they have like a very specific,
Yes.
I love it, or a specific color. It just, you're right.
Yes. Yes. That it makes it so fun. So tell me about the hardest decision you've ever had to make.
I would say it was when I left my ex. I was in a violent relationship and I tried to leave 5 times. And the 5th time it stuck. And it has been a little over 2 years since then. And it was hard because it was changing everything about my life. I moved 400 miles away. I lost one of my dogs in the process. There were so many, I lost a lot of my possessions. And I had been very conditioned to believe that that was what I deserved and the best I was ever going to get. So this idea that I was going to leave that, it was hard. It was so hard.
It is hard. I went through a divorce and it was a divorce that was obvious to everybody that I really wanted. But even still, it was difficult to go through because it's your whole life is just changing and everything changes, where you live, what you do. And you're right, all those possessions, which kind of taught me the lesson that those possessions don't really matter. And I like to collect things, but you can go on without them if you have to.
Absolutely. And I would say losing the possessions actually made me enjoy what I have now way more, because it was like, now it feels like a luxury. When I first moved into my apartment and I came from staying with my best friend after I left and we were living in the wilderness of West Virginia. And I was out in nature every single day and I didn't have a bathtub. And I got my new apartment and I got a bathtub and I thought, whoa, like this is living.
Yes. Yes, I can relate. When my husband and I first got married, my current husband, we bought an old building in a small town in Missouri, in the center of Missouri, a town of about 20,000 people. And this building was in danger of collapsing. It was built in 1890 and it was a 2-story brick building. And so as soon as we bought it, my husband said, well, we're moving in. And I'm like, what? We don't have water. We don't have electricity. He said, yep, I know, but we're moving in. So, for the first couple of weeks, you had to drive to the 24-hour gas station to use the bathroom. And it's like, this is crazy. So I went home during the week a lot and stayed with my mom. But, eventually he got water in, we got electricity, but we were constantly working on that building. And I remember we didn't have a sink in our little bathroom and it was the only place we had water. So I had to do the dishes in the bathtub, which kills your back. And one year he bought me a kitchen sink for Christmas and it was just a plain old kitchen sink. And I cried and cried because I knew it meant I was going to have a sink now. And so it is the little things, that really make you appreciate what you've got now. So I can so relate to that. So tell us about a significant event in your life that knocked you down and how did you pick yourself up?
When I would say the first real turning point in my life was when I was 13 years old. I had been abused most of my life from a family friend, and that started before I was even conscious age. And so when I was 13, I got kicked out. I came home from school one day and my mom had put all of my stuff in garbage bags on the porch and locked the house and told me I didn't live there anymore.
Wow.
And yeah, that was a shock to the system. And it's interesting now, I've only recently started to realize, I mean, there's been a lot that I've learned from that, but there are just so many layers to it. And so like a friend recently was like, oh, my 12-year-old did this. And my brain said like, oh, she's almost an adult. It's like, no, she's a child. She's a child. It's just that I had turned up at 13. And I went and lived with my best friend for a month. And then my guidance counselor found out and they made me move into a shelter. And because the school year had already started, I was living in a shelter for teenagers 2 towns away. And every morning I would get up and I would take the bus into one city to another city. So 2 buses and then literally walk a mile to school. And this was 9th grade for me, so that just trying to keep myself in school meant doing a lot of things that were unsafe and really changed me.
Yeah, that's pretty significant, I'd say. And it's amazing to me that at 12, 13, how old were you?
13, yeah.
13. At 13, that you had the wisdom to know that you should continue going to school and that it was worth all that effort to get there. That's pretty amazing.
I think I was really grasping at the familiar because I loved school. I loved reading. Books were my salvation for so long. And my friends were my salvation because life at home was hard. And so it never even occurred to me not to go to school. And, at that point, I was living in the shelter, but I was getting bullied by the girls who were also on my floor. And so, and I'm talking about like extreme bullying, there's different levels, but like I would get woken up with ice baths in the morning.
Oh my.
Yeah. And so I would leave the shelter before that and I would end up falling asleep on park benches. And I became a sex worker. I was sex trafficked as a teenager because of that, because a guy pulled over one day and asked if I would help him out. And he took me to school and he gave me lunch money. And that's where that started. And even though all of that was hard, I was on the bus and I've always worked with kids and stuff. And so I learned how to do like voices and Robin Williams, one of my idols. And I would make the bus drivers laugh. And it happened so frequently that my brain started to think like, everything is awful. Like, I don't know when my next meal is. I don't know if I'm going to die today. Like literally, I was in so many unsafe situations, but I could make someone laugh. Like there is a possibility here to find a bright spot, even if it doesn't last.
Interesting. That's really interesting. So, what did you do when you turned 18?
Well, I moved out when I was 17. I went to college, and that was not actually my choice initially. So I got kicked out for the first time at 13, but then I lived in 20 different places or so over the next 4 years until I turned 17. And part of that was in and out of psych wards. And by the time I came home after my 5th psych ward stay when I was 17, I came home and I did my senior year from home. My parents and I really had no relationship at that point. I didn't trust anything. I mean, I came home to an empty bedroom. I had a mattress on the floor. I didn't have a door. I didn't have a dresser. I had no privacy. And so I went off to college because my parents, I got into one college and because I applied very late. And my parents said, if you don't go to college, you need to move out. And so I went to college. I was like, well, what choice do I have? I didn't have any credit to be able to meet a landlord. I didn't know how to pay utilities. Like I didn't know any of that. So I went to school.
Right. And so did you end up staying in college?
Yes and no. So I technically don't have a degree at this point, but at my school, you need 120 credits to get a degree, and I have 120.5. So I technically have enough credits, but I didn't fulfill an exact degree.
There's some things they require that maybe you don't have yet or something.
Right. It's a handful of classes. Yeah.
But you do have the college education. So,
right.
Yeah. I think that's important. I think going to college is so much more than just studying the subjects you're studying, because the real value of college, I think, is that it puts you in a group of people who are all trying to better themselves and learn. And it puts you in a state of mind where you can explore things and work things out and push yourself to do more. So I think there's great value in going to college. doesn't matter if you get the degree or not.
Yeah, well, I think and college falls under this umbrella. I think there's great value to putting yourself in situations where you're not the smartest person in the room.
Oh, yes.
And you get to meet different people and learn different cultures. And also I think, college could be a really valuable experience for more people if it was framed in that way, as opposed to you have to go and study and have a high GPA and only do it to get the career. Even now, like, I know at some point I'm going to go back. And I'm so clear on what I want to do with my life. I'm like, now I know how to have conversations with my professors. Now I know how to talk to my teachers.
Yes, that's
fellow students. Like, that's so different from when I was a kid, when I was there,
Yes, that is so valuable, I think. Yeah, and I love going to school. I had 2 bachelor's degrees and 2 master's degrees, and I'd love to go get a PhD. I could go to school forever. I love it that much. But it's not an easy thing to do. So,
me too. I love school. I mean, I have found a lot of education strictly through nonfiction books and personal development and that stuff, and taking online courses. And there's so much out there for free or for lower cost than going to college that people have access to.
Yes, I think that's just beautiful. And the state I live in, I think they have a program where you're over 65, you can take college classes for free. You don't get grades, but you can sit in on them. And I'm thinking, wow, I'm going to take all kinds of stuff. I just think that's cool. So,
well, technically, anyone can do that anywhere at any age. It's up to the teacher. Yeah, I have sat in on college courses before and just said, I'm considering, I don't know if I want to do something in this major. When I come back, can I sit in on your course? And if there's a space in the room, the teachers have always said yes.
Wow, that's interesting. I should check into that too, because wow, that's so much possibilities. I just love going to school. When I was a kid, fall was my favorite time of year. It still is, but I used to love, packing that school bag for the first time for the first day of school and learning who my teachers were. And I even loved homework. I loved coming home and having a project to do. So that's pretty cool.
Same. Some of my greatest learning experiences in high school, especially, but also in college, were getting to do projects that made me think outside of writing like a book report.
Oh, yeah. Book reports are a powerful thing to learn how to do because as we go through life, there's always topics that we want to explore or we want to convince other people about or promote. And if you learn how to do a book report when in grade school, you can at least put information together to share with people. So I think that's pretty powerful. Yeah. So who has been your most important mentor?
I think, I've had a couple of actual mentors, like people who identified themselves as such for me, or who I asked them specifically to be my mentor. And I've been really lucky in that sense. And also, I think my most important mentor, honestly, has been my therapist.
Oh, yes. They're valuable mentors. I can tell you that. Yeah.
I was in therapy. I've been in therapy since I was 5 years old. I half adopted. And so that was how my parents initially wanted to set me up so that when I found out that I would have support. I didn't find out in that way. I found out when I was living in the shelter. But because I had been in therapy from so young and in multiple ways, I was meeting with my guidance counselor in elementary school every week, and that was not normal. Like most kids, didn't have that. And then I had a therapist outside of the house. And then I went through, it wasn't the big brother, big sister program, but something similar to that. Where I had a big sister. I had someone who picked me up from school once a week and would take me out to lunch or take me to get ice cream or something and just talk to me about life. And I've had regular therapists ongoing. And so the therapist I'm with now, I've been with since early 2020. And they were, not only did they literally save my life calling the cops when I was in a life-threatening situation, but they just had so much responsibility for helping me to understand everything that I've been through and living a life of choice now.
Yes. I love that. That's pretty powerful. So tell us about how a turning point in your life propelled you in a new direction. I think you've had a lot of turning points. But
don't we all, right? Life is just pivot after pivot.
Right. Yes, that's right.
Yeah, I would say the so that when I was 13, that was the biggest like initial shift. But my trauma didn't stop, obviously, because I just got out of a bad relationship almost a little over 2 years ago. And so when I was in college, I was assaulted. And after everything that I had been through growing up, and also like having been in psych wards, like I basically just shut down and didn't tell anyone, and tried to like put it behind me. That was not successful. The body keeps score, right?
Right. Yes, it definitely does.
Yeah. And so that came up. I ended up overdosing in an attempt to kill myself. I ended up in another psych ward, and the doctor who was there changed my life because he refused to medicate me and waited until I told him what I had been through that landed me there, not just in that 6 months, but since I was, going back to age of 4. And eventually he said, I don't think that you have a chemical imbalance. I think that you are dealing with depression and CPTSD and anxiety, all as a result of the trauma you've been through. And so the prescription is meditation.
Trauma is definitely something that follows us around for our whole lives, and you've got to deal with it. And my problem was that I had an early childhood trauma, and then I had another trauma in my young adult life when my daughter died shortly after birth. And I never dealt with either one of those traumas. It was just like, okay, well, we just go on. And so this angst, this brokenness, it just built up inside of me. And then one day it just exploded. And I decided it would be such a great idea to help someone escape from prison. And that, of course, changed my life dramatically. But I think if I had dealt with those traumas, probably that wouldn't have happened. It just has a way of just exploding when you least expect it.
Right. Well, we're not taught, generally speaking, the majority of people, especially in America, but a lot of people around the world as well, that to deal with trauma, to recognize, big T versus little t trauma, things that are ongoing, that trauma is not just what happens to you, but what doesn't happen to you, to deal with feelings, like to name feelings. We're not taught most of those things, And there, even when I got out of my last relationship, so many people were like, oh, you survived. I said, I'm surviving. I'm surviving every day. Trauma changes your body. It changes your brain. It changes the trajectory of your life.
Yes. And it's a never ending process. You have to keep being aware of it and moving forward, I think. And I do think that people who go through really difficult things and survive them, and even find a way to thrive in them, to find a way to pull on that to propel them into something bigger. I think that we have a power that people who never have any kind of a trauma don't have, because I think it's through those difficult times that we really have the biggest opportunities to grow, to learn and grow. And so the wisdom that comes with a trauma-filled life, it can either kill you or it can really make you, extraordinary in the way that you look at the world.
Yeah, I think it's, I hear people say a lot of the time, and no shade to anyone who says it, because I used to say it, but now I'm very much against saying I'm grateful for my trauma, because I'm not grateful for my trauma. I'm not grateful for what happened. I'm grateful for who I became, for who I chose to become in spite of it.
That's right. Because it is a choice.
Right. I had a friend. He said, you had all of the ingredients to become a habanero souffle, but instead you became a little cupcake. And I was like, thank you.
Yes.
You're right. I chose that.
So true. That's so true. I love that.
Right. Well, and
love that. So say that again. I think that's really important. Say that again. I want to be sure we all hear it.
Yeah. He said, you had all of the ingredients to become a habanero souffle, but instead you decided to become a cupcake.
I love that. I think that's powerful. So what's one question you wish I'd asked? Is there something you'd like to share with us that we haven't touched on?
I think the one thing that I will answer would be the piece of advice that I give to everyone, because I am a coach. And so I work with a lot of people, and I'm a meditation teacher, and I meet a lot of people in that trauma-informed space. And all the time they're like, I don't understand how you didn't become a drug addict, locked up, like all of these, negative things. And I said, it's not that I had it all figured out. It's not that I, knew everything I was going to do in order to survive it, or that I thought I could ever thrive. It's that I just focused on the next right step, just the next right step. Like when I was on the bus making bus drivers laugh, I wasn't thinking, oh, one day I'm going to be a meditation teacher and a clarity coach.
Right.
I was thinking I can smile, I can laugh.
I like that.
And then I can move forward. Like it's just the next right step. And that's all you have to be responsible for.
I love that. That's pretty powerful. And, any kind of journey we want to undertake always begins with a step. And then it has to have a next step and a next step. So, those little steps may seem insignificant, but they are game changers.
Right. Well, and you think about, everything, right? It's like if you put on weight and you want to lose weight, if you want to learn how to play an instrument, if you want to learn how to run a marathon, if you want to start a business, like you don't just the next day have a business, the next day you're an expert cellist, the next day you're running, it's always going to be baby steps. The phrase is, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
Right. That's so true. Yes, that is so true. That's so true. I love that. Is there a question you'd like to ask me?
I think, I was thinking about the different interviews that you've done, and I would love to know what has been one of the most surprising things you've learned from someone.
My very favorite interview that I've ever done, there's a couple of them, but one of them, I was a podcast guest on another woman's podcast, and it was called Friends Missing Friends. And she was talking, she had her best friend died, and she realized that people didn't really deal with friends who died. There's things out there to talk about, your parent dying or your child dying, but that they're really, when your friend dies, you're kind of just left on your own to get through it. And so she had me on her podcast, and we talked about one of my best friends when I was in prison was a woman named Lisa Montgomery. And Lisa was executed by the federal government in January of 2021. And it was stunning how traumatic that was, and how, it was just one of the most difficult things I've ever gone through. And so we talked through that. And I think that was one of my favorite interviews that I've ever heard, played back, that I've given. Because, Lisa's life and Lisa's execution are not things I generally talk about, but there's such a big part of me, it's in there. And so it gave me this opportunity to talk about her. And I think it turned into a beautiful interview. I also, I think I did I had a Dateline episode, and some of the things that came out in that Dateline episode, when I watched it, I was like, oh, I never knew that. And it was things that I said in the interview, but I didn't realize what I was saying. And then when I heard myself, I was like, oh yeah, that's right. That is a powerful thing. So it's kind of funny how you maybe say something all the time, but until you replay it being recorded, you don't even realize what you're saying.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I don't know, tell me if this has been your experience, but anytime I re-listen or rewatch one of my interviews, I have this moment of like, wow, I really have done the work. I really know like who I am and what I want. And like, it's astounding. Like I feel it. And then I listen to myself and I'm like, oh, okay.
There, I did it. Myself on the back. I've come a long ways.
Right.
I think that's pretty interesting. I think that's really interesting. You certainly have come a long ways. And, I'm so grateful that you're sharing your story, because I think that people who are really struggling, when they hear someone tell a story that's similar to theirs, they can grasp onto it and find a bit of hope and be inspired to take that next step forward, just that next best step, because that's all you have to do is take the next step. You don't have to accomplish something huge in your day. You just have to take a step.
Absolutely.
And that's doable for anybody.
I love what you just said about, when you see someone who's going through something similar, or it's almost like as bad, as what you is.
Right.
I don't resonate with someone who's like, oh, I grew up working on Wall Street, and, I've never, life hasn't been that hard. I've been really fortunate. It's like, great for you. But that is not my story. And then I hear
that's true.
Like, oh, I went from being on welfare to owning $1 million company. It's like, I want to learn from you because you know.
Yes, because you've done the work. You've done the work. You didn't just fall into it. I know I have very little patience for small talk. I want to talk about the hard things. I want to get into the guts of something and talk about the things that we don't like to talk about. And, when someone just has this perfect Ivy League life, they really don't have that kind of a story behind them. And I love the difficult stories because that's really what the essence of being a human being is about, overcoming that and learning from it. And then sharing with others so that they can learn too.
Right. Yeah. It makes you cultured.
Yes. Yes. I love it. So what's one word that inspires you?
One word. I would say being. Being is my word for the year.
Mm-hmm.
And I always pick I actually don't ever pick a word. Like I don't look for words. They eventually come. And at the beginning of this year, a lot of people asked me, if being meant, like being present. And it does. But even deeper than that, it's being rather than doing. And I know you mentioned that on one of your podcasts. Too, and I thought, oh, how kismet, because I have spent so much of my life, especially with trauma, being hyper independent, just doing and doing and doing, trying to be enough in that sense of being able to check all the boxes and be a type A and all of that. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't living my life. I wasn't able to exist and just sit and feel it all.
I love that. I just love it because that so relates to me too. I'm a person who's always doing, and I have a million projects and I want to get things done. But I have learned that I have to just like stop and be aware of my world around me and just kind of appreciate it, because you're right. Doing gets a lot of stuff done, but it really doesn't feed your soul. I think that being is what feeds your soul. So I love that word. I think that's pretty powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Charli. I've loved having you on, and I look forward to sharing this story with the rest of the world.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Toby, for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you for joining me on Fierce Conversations with Toby. Your support and listening means so much to me, and I hope today's conversation makes a difference in your world. If you would like to support this podcast, there are many ways to do so. I found these ways tend to help the most in getting our message out into the world. Number 1, subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you listen to or watch this podcast. If you can leave a 5-star rating or a like on this episode on YouTube, that helps even more. And if you leave a comment or a review, that helps the most. The next way you can support Fierce Conversations with Toby is to join our Patreon at patreon.com/fierceconversations. All tiers come with a downloadable digital gratitude journal created by me and membership in a private Facebook group that I also lead. Most importantly, 10% of all proceeds from your subscription will go directly to donating my workbooks to women in prison. Finally, sharing the link to this show with your friends, family, and anyone who wants to listen is appreciated more than I can say. Thank you again for joining me today and supporting this show by listening to it and sharing it with friends. Fierce Conversations is created and hosted by me, Toby Dorr. Produced by Number 3 Productions. The theme song that you're hearing now, Groovin', was composed and arranged by Lisa Plass. Lisa also plays the flute for the theme, with Carolyn Parody on piano and Tony Ventura on bass. Find out more at tobydor.com. This is Fierce Conversations with Toby. Escape your prison.